Dear friends, today we will discuss about the file system approach, which is also known as traditional approach and DBMS approach. So, we start with file system approach. In the traditional file system approach, data is stored in flat files which are maintained by the file system under the operating system's control. Now, before elaborating this definition, let us look at some of the related terms. File. A file is a collection of records which contains logically related data known as fields. Flat files. A flat file is a file containing records that has no structured interrelationship. Look at the figure. This shows the file system in which 4 flat files are there, namely customer details, storing the details about the customers, customer loan, storing the information about the loan taken by the customers, customer fixed deposit containing the details about fixed deposit done by the customers, and customer transactions containing details about the transactions done by the customers, like depositing their loan premium, amount withdrawal details, etc. The end users use the application programs to perform specific tasks. For example, personnel in bank's loan department make use of the loan processing system to process the loan of customer. Similarly, fixed deposit processing program is used for processing the tasks related to fixed deposit transactions by the customers, etc. All application programs go through the file system to access the data stored in these flat files. So, disadvantages of file system approach: data redundancy and inconsistency. Redundancy here means duplication. Thus, same data is placed in various flat files, and this duplication leads to inconsistency, and inconsistency means non-uniformity. Let us look at one example. In the banking system, we consider that there are 3 flat files, each storing the details about savings, loan and customers' accounts. In these files, the fields customer name, address, telephone number may be stored all the files. So, this repetition of same data in multiple files causes data duplication. So, if there is a change of address of customer, if it is stored in multiple files, it may happen that the new address is updated in one file, and in another file same data is not updated and still contains the old or wrong address. Similarly, if one customer details have to be deleted, it may happen it is deleted from one file and in another file same data is not deleted. So, if data duplication is there in multiple files, data in one file may not get updated in another file during an update or delete operation. That leads to data inconsistency. Next is data dependence. The programs written for accessing the data from the flat files through file system is very much dependent on how the data is stored in a flat file. If the structure of the flat file is changed, the program written for accessing the data from that file also need to be changed for retrieval of data. Thus, the application programs are dependent upon data. Let us take an example. When in a company's database, phone number of employees changes from 5 digit to 7 digit, all application programs which access the phone numbers need to be modified. This becomes very time consuming and may lead to errors. Next is difficult to get quick answers to simple queries. Application programs in the file system are written for processing specific queries. If in case new requirement arises and we need data on the basis of some new query, this application program will not work and new application program need to be written for performing that task. Thus, it is difficult to get quick answers to even simple queries through file system approach. Let us take an example. Consider a banking system which maintains the account of its customers. Suppose we have an application program to generate list of all customers. Now, if we want to generate the list of customers whose account balance is more than 50,000, then either we have to create a new application program or we will extract such information manually. So, it is difficult to access required data in a convenient and efficient manner. Next disadvantage, lack of data integrity and quality. For example, in a company's database, basic pay should be in positive. So, these type of constraints are added to the system by writing appropriate code in application program. But if new constraints need to be added, then it is difficult to change application program to enforce them. So, it may lead to the poor data. Next disadvantage is difficult to share data. For example, the bank manager might want a report showing the names of customers who use all the bank services. Since details about saving, loans, etc. data will be in separate files and may be in different formats. So, it is difficult to retrieve the data from these files collectively and to generate a single report as per manager's requirement. Next disadvantage is transaction related problems. For example, in a banking system, a transaction that transfers rupees 2000 from account A to account B. Suppose that a system crash occurred after the removal of 2000 from the account A, but before depositing to the account B, which may result in an inconsistent state. So, transaction should not execute partially but wholly. It is difficult to control it in a file system approach. Next disadvantage is lack of security. For example, different levels of users give different queries on the same file in a banking system. On the basis of these queries, different application programs are developed by each user. This results in complex application. Since each user is authorized for searching answers for ad hoc queries, so it is difficult to enforce security constraints. Next disadvantage is concurrency problem. For example, consider the banking system. Assume that the bank manager is analyzing all the transactions made by the customers. At about the same time, a customer accesses his account to make a withdrawal. The account is both ready by the bank manager and updated by the customer at the same time. This is called concurrent access. That is, accessing the same file at the same time by different users for different purposes. Because the customer's account is being updated at the same time, there is a possibility of the bank manager reading an incorrect balance. After looking at the file system approach and its limitations, let us understand the concept of database management system approach. In short, we say DBMS approach. In the DBMS approach, all requests to use the data stored in the database are handled by the DBMS. The end user can use either the application programs or standard SQL to access the data. We will be discussing in detail about SQL in later lectures. The application programs are written in some programming language such as COBOL, PLI, C++ or in some higher level 4th generation language. The standard SQL interface is provided as an integral part of the database system software to access the database. The DBMS acts as a layer of abstraction over the file system. Here, abstraction means the simplified representation of something that is quite complex. Look at the figure. In the file system interface, the end user uses an application program written in a high level language such as COBOL to access the data from the customer details file. The files are maintained by the file system under the operating system control, whereas in the DBMS interface, the end user uses an SQL interface to place a request to the DBMS to retrieve data from the customer details table. Now, advantages of DBMS approach. First is controlling redundancy. For example, suppose in a student's database, the fields like roll number, student name, subject name, etc. are duplicated in more than one file, which leads to the redundancy of the data. So, we need a centralized control to avoid unnecessary duplication of data. By using DBMS approach, the duplication of data can be reduced. The repeated fields such as student name, subject name, etc. may not be repeated in DBMS approach because of centralization of the database. Next advantage is restricting unauthorized access. For example, financial data is often considered confidential and hence only authorized persons are allowed to access such data. In addition, some users may be permitted only to retrieve data, whereas others are allowed both to retrieve and to update. Hence, the type of access operation, retrieval or update, must also be controlled. Typically, users or user groups are given account numbers protected by passwords, which they can use to gain access to the database. A DBMS should provide a security and authorization subsystem which the DBA uses to create accounts and to specify account restrictions. The DBMS should then enforce these restrictions automatically. Next advantage is flexibility of the system is improved. For example, if in a centralized system the phone number field has changed from 5 digit to 7 digit, then this change in the structure of data can be absorbed easily. It does not require substantial alterations to the program as in the case of file based system. Next advantage is integrity can be approved. For example, in students database we may apply a constraint that the student roll number should lie between 1 and 500. If someone tries to enter some other number, then it may generate appropriate message. With centralized control, DBA can easily define constraints which can be easily enforced. Next advantage is security can be approved. For example, in a banking system, employees at different levels may be given access to different types of data in a database. The chairman may be given access to all the data in the database, whereas a clerk may have access only the names and the balances of the accounts, but cannot modify them. Next advantage is organization's requirements can be identified. For example, a DBA must choose best file structure and access methods to give fast response for the high critical applications as compared to less critical applications. Now, disadvantages of DBMS approach: larger size. The database made by using DBMS approach requires larger disk and probably larger and more powerful computer system to operate upon. Next disadvantages is greater complexity. For developing database, for optimum use of database must be very carefully designed. If it is not done well, the new system may fail to satisfy anyone and thus will be useless. Next disadvantage is greater impact of system failure, all eggs in one basket. In this approach of database development, if system containing database crashes, then all the data will be destroyed, as all the data resides in one place in the DBMS approach. Next disadvantage is more complex recovery procedures. In this approach of database development, if a system failure occurs, it becomes necessary that all the data must be recovered, as the data in this is related to each other and can lose its importance if it is not complete. Now, why DBMS? First is application programs and queries are data independent. They do not depend on any one particular physical representation of data in secondary storage or access technique. Another is allows for sharing of data among different users. Users are also able to access the database concurrently without facing the issue of inconsistent data. Next advantage is controls redundancy and inconsistency, as duplication of data is eliminated or reduced to the end. Next advantage of DBMS is provides secure access to the database, as only authorized users can access the data of the database. So, the data is secure from the unauthorized user. Next advantage is enforces integrity constraints, also known as business rules, by preventing the entry of invalid information into the database. It uses constraints to prevent the entry of invalid information into the database. Next advantage is it enables backup and recovery from system crashes. Now, question arises, when not to use DBMS? In spite of the advantages of using a DBMS, there are a few situations in which such a system may involve unnecessary overhead costs, as that would not be incurred in traditional file system processing. The overhead cost of using a DBMS are due to following reasons. First, high initial investment in hardware, software and training. Next, generality that a DBMS provides for defining and processing data. Next, overhead for providing security, concurrency control, recovery and integrity functions. With this, we come to the end of today's lecture. Today, we have discussed about file system approach, DBMS approach, along with their respective advantages and disadvantages. In the next lecture, we will discuss about the data models, say network model, hierarchical model and relational model. Thank you.